Today we'll take a look at the beginning of the Civil War. We've spent the last several classes taking a look at a number of events that would contribute to the beginning of the Civil War and that caused the South and the North to grow apart from one another. But today we'll take a look at the immediate causes. We'll also look at the very first confrontation between the North and the South. The immediate cause of the Civil War was the election of 1860. In the election of 1860, there were four candidates running for president. From the North was Abraham Lincoln, a Republican. Also from the North, Stephen Douglas, a Northern Democrat. That's the same Stephen Douglas who had held a series of debates with Lincoln for the Illinois Senate seat in 1858. John C. Breckinridge was a Southern Democrat, and John Bell, a member of the Constitutional Union Party. Abraham Lincoln wins the election of 1860, and it's because of that win that Southern states will begin to secede from the Union, and we will eventually end up in the Civil War. Lincoln wins under some strange circumstances. He has no majority of a popular vote, meaning that there was not a majority of people in the United States that voted for Abraham Lincoln. He won the election by not having at least 50% people voting for him. He had won all of the free states, all of the northern states, and had won none of the southern states. He actually didn't even appear on many of the slave states' ballots. As you can see from the map of the United States for the election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln, who's won the states highlighted in red, won all of the free states, those in the north, and Oregon and California on the west coast. Breckinridge, a Southern Democrat, won the majority of the southern states. Stephen Douglas wins only the state of Missouri. And Bell wins states kind of along the border of the North and the South. These were states that were pro-slavery. Looking at the map, it is a bit understandable why the southern states would have been upset about the results of the election of 1860. Like colonists prior to the Revolution, they felt that they had lost representation in their government. The man who was going to be their president had not been elected by states from the South, by those pro-slavery states. He had been elected by less than a majority of the United States, and southern states and southern people, pro-slavery people, were upset by this. The Civil War really begins with the first states to secede from the Union. South Carolina is the first. They secede from the United States shortly after the election of 1860. Secede meaning that they leave the United States and declare themselves separate from the U.S. They're followed shortly thereafter by several states from the South. And by the time Lincoln is inaugurated as president, a few months after the election, 7 states have already seceded. By the time Lincoln steps into office, he has a huge problem on his hands already. And in the few weeks and even a few short months after he's inaugurated, there are 8 other slave states that would secede. Within a few months after his election, the North and the South are very distinctly separate from one another, and the South is going to set up their own government. Lincoln has a major problem on his hands. Those southern states that had seceded from the Union draft their own constitution and declare themselves the Confederate States of America. We've had that term Confederate before when the colonies tried to set up the Articles of Confederation. A confederacy is a loose union or a loose grouping of states, and in this case, the southern states that become a part of the Confederate States of America include in their constitution the phrase sovereign and independent. The states of the South will remain very independent from one another, but will work collectively to help one another. Their constitution also recognizes and protects the institution of slavery. Slavery is legal in the Confederate States of America. After drafting a constitution, the Confederate States of America elect their first and only president, Jefferson Davis. He will be Abraham Lincoln's counterpart during the Civil War. As we said earlier, when Lincoln takes office after his inauguration, a number of states have already seceded from the Union, and several more will shortly after his inauguration. Lincoln has a huge problem on his hands, and he makes it very clear right from the beginning that his number one priority as President of the United States is to preserve the Union, to reunite those states that have seceded and keep the United States as a nation. Ending slavery was not a primary concern, not a main goal. Lincoln had said that he felt slavery should be kept or ended, whichever was going to save the Union, because as president, as leader of the United States, that was his responsibility, not to make a decision over slavery. His opinion over slavery and of its usefulness during the war will change a few years from now. After South Carolina secedes from the Union, we'll have our first conflict between the militaries of the North and the South. These happen in Charleston, South Carolina at Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter was located on an island in the harbor of Charleston, and after South Carolina seceded from the Union, the fort was occupied by Union or Northern soldiers. Confederate military from South Carolina demanded the surrender of the Union troops at Fort Sumter. Lincoln receives a message detailing what the Confederates have demanded, and he has a few options as he sees it. One, he can surrender, but he realizes that if he surrenders, the war is essentially over. He's giving the South rights. He's recognizing the Confederacy as existing and having rights, so he certainly doesn't want to do that. His next option is to fight, which causes a different type of problem. If he fights, he's the aggressor. He's the one that started the war, and he doesn't want that as a responsibility. It also doesn't make the North look very good. It doesn't win them a lot of favor with foreign countries that we might need help from later on. His third option, which ends up being the best, is to wait it out. Lincoln decides that he's going to send word to Fort Sumter to wait. They are under siege. No supplies are allowed in or out. The only supplies that they will receive is limited food. Eventually, the Confederate military grows tired of waiting, and they're ordered by the Confederate government to attack the fort. The Confederacy fires the first shots of the Civil War on Fort Sumter. That becomes very important because now the South is the guilty one. They started the war by firing the first shots, and Lincoln has avoided casting a negative image on the North and giving any sort of positive image to the South. That will conclude our notes for this session. We'll pick up next time with notes over some of the early battles and early twists and turns of the Civil War.